Hello and welcome to episode 254 of our SAP on Azure Video Podcast. Today is August 7, and together with Goran, we are here to talk about anything related to SAP and Microsoft. Hello, everyone. So we continue today with the topic around Entra ID and SAP integration. We've covered different aspects of the integration in this area already in the past, but we thought that today we could take a look from a customer perspective. I'm glad to have Roj Koc with us today, who's working closely with customers in Denmark and Northern Europe to share what he's doing with customers in this market. Welcome, Roj. So, Roj, before we dive into the topic, maybe you can quickly introduce yourself. What do you do at Microsoft? And then we'll take a closer look of what you can do with Entra ID and governance.
Hi, Holger. Hi, everyone. And Holger, thank you so much for having me on this podcast episode. I could really see that there's a lot of episodes tied to this podcast. I mean, we are above 200 episodes, so that's great. But yeah, like you mentioned, I'm Roj. I'm a solution security engineer here at Microsoft. I actually had another role before this. It was actually still within the same area, but I was called a technical security specialist. So it's kind of the same role. We just got new titles and new responsibilities around the different aspects in the security platform. But I have mainly been covering IAM for almost 8 years now. I started out as an IAM consultant in the SailPoint space. So I've been implementing SailPoint for some of our customers in Denmark and so on. And then the last 4 years, I jumped straight into the Microsoft Entra ID platform, where I have a lot of focus on and also cover various other security products as well in the M365. So yeah.
Fantastic. Well, it's really great to have you here because, we had discussions with Martin Repple. Martin Repple was on the show a few times where he talked about Entra ID integration. We had Jitan Desai from the SuccessFactors integration with Entra. But they're all, not that this is bad, they're all coming from the product management side. And I think you are working with the customers day in, day out. And I think obviously there's one thing that you put something on paper, that you create an architecture. You are actually working with the customer to implement these architectures, to hear their feedback, what is working, what is not working. So I'm really looking forward to our discussions.
Definitely. I think one of the key responsibilities of our role as a security solution engineer is that we are listening to a lot of their feedbacks and challenges in the identity access governance market. So a lot of these things are something we are taking back to the Microsoft, to the product group, and telling them the experiences and maybe some of the challenges that they're facing out in the organization when it comes to management of roles, users towards outbound applications and inbound as well. So I will also try to summarize maybe some of these challenges in one of my slides, and then I will not bother you too much with slides because we will also have a demo later. So let me start sharing my slide.
We love demos.
Yeah, definitely. So let me just do like this. If you just give me a sec.
Sure.
There you go. So yeah, you actually mentioned some. Let me see here. I think this is the right slide. Yeah, and you can see it as well, Holger.
It's loading. Yes, I think it's coming up. Yeah,
that's perfect. So you actually mentioned some of your hosts some of your guests that you have been invited to some of your videos, such as Shaitan and Holger, which have been touching upon the different elements with regards to the SAP integration to Entra ID, both from a federation point of view, but also provisioning and how you get your identity from your HR, your master record data towards Entra ID on both a cloud native scenario, but also in a hybrid scenario. But I think if we kind of take a step back, it started out with the key announcements made by SAP, as you already heard about, and I will not go into a lot of details with that. But SAP the SAP IDM is getting out of support, so out of maintenance in 27, and the customers have the extensibility or the possibility to actually extend that support to 2030. But now it's a very good time to kind of evaluate and look into new platforms, such as Entra ID, which is the new IAM platform for governing identities and the lifecycle, not only the identities, but also the lifecycle around the accesses that are provisioned to those. So if we take a look, and this is also something I really encourage my listeners that to go into the SAP blog post to kind of revalidate some of the patterns and also some of the steps that you might take as an organization to actually go from the SAP IDM, which were responsible for provisioning your identities and assigning roles authorization in SAP towards your users. So there's great examples on how you can take advantage of the Entra ID, not just as an IDP platform, but also as a governance platform. Because yes, we are indeed an identity provider, but we also have the extensibility to add the IGA on top, and the identity access governance is more centered around how we balance between governance and compliance with the identity in the centrum. So, and you are probably seeing this before on some of the previous calls, but basically some of the new cloud transformations that we are seeing from the previous SAP IDM to Microsoft Entra is that it's all centered around having the SAP Cloud Identity Service. And SAP Cloud Identity Service, as you also know, is the IDP for SAP users and the SAP accesses around. So we have the possibility to actually use SAP Cloud Identity to provision to these different downstream SAP applications and so on. So the recommendations from SAP is still to use the SAP Cloud Identity Service, which is essentially consists of two main services, which is the identity authentication service and then the identity provisioning service that are managing all the outbound provisioning to the downstream SAP applications, both for on-premise through the Cloud Connector and also for cloud-native SAP applications such as your SAP B2B. And then, of course, we have the SAP SuccessFactors, which acts as an HR system to actually provision your users from a master record table into your directory, both local directory, but also your Entra ID. And this is the overall, so this is kind of the reference architecture for how you can take some or have some inspiration on how to go fully Entra ID. And we also have some, I think, some few development areas where we are working on an integration to SAP IAG, which is actually the governance module to handle all the risk analysis and so on. But it's still under NDA, and there's still a bit of time left before we actually announce the private preview of that, but it will essentially come sometime. So yeah. And just to take a step back and kind of talk about some of the common business challenges, then if we look at how we define identity access governance, and this is independently if we talk Microsoft, if we talk Okta or SailPoint, but identity governance is the system to report the actual state of your identities, the accesses, and so on. And the identity access governance system is also the system to report any deviation between Entra and between all the outbound applications that we have. So it's essentially important to actually mention that if you don't have a written document that describe how a corporate identity behave in your digital estate, then you are not in a governed state, right? That's what IGA is about. Now, on the other hand, IAM is more about managing the life cycle of your identities within your IDP. And IGA is just adding the governance on top of that life cycle. That's basically the description here and the definition of that. But some of the challenges that we see out in the market, especially since I'm sitting in a client-facing role, it's definitely that customers have focused on the tooling aspect. But sometimes they also need to take a step back. And since I have been in an in-house position as well, I know how cumbersome it can be to actually define a scope of an IGA program. Because essentially it's not a project, it's actually a continuous program that you start to improve month by month, or even not even month by month, but day by day and month and so on, right? So you need to have some processes in place for managing identities and accesses that I'm mentioning here. And those processes that I just mentioned are always informal. They are often not documented. So the company have not even defined what is a corporate identity policy for instance, in company X. They haven't really done that.
Yeah.
And then they look at a legacy IGA solution and basically do an end-to-end migration to a new modern cloud IGA solution. And those new modern cloud IGA solution can cover every single edge cases. So you need to revisit your processes. You need to understand the full scope of your business processes before you start out integrating all these nice automations and the life cycle around it and how you design your RBAC concepts and so on. You need to validate each and every data endpoint. And what I mean by data endpoint is basically revisiting your HR master data. Because essentially what we are going to do in the project, when we kickstart an IGA project, is that we're going to take advantage of all these data endpoints and these attributes that we are getting from an HR system. And from that HR system, we can start doing a mapping to any IAM solutions that we have. It could be Okta, it could be Entra in this case, which is the main topic of today, of course. But then essentially what you want and the outcome of that is that you will be able to leverage the data quality from your HR system to actually map that to an Entra ID attribute. And then via that, you can then build up your ABAC policies, your RBAC policies about the identities that are getting born from the HR system down to the underlying downstream SAP applications, for an example, right?
So basically, the HR system is the leading system in the end, where I really maintain my master data, which makes sense. I mean, the HR system is my representation basically of me as an employee, and you take that and then you can replicate this to Entra ID and to build roles and all the permissions on top of that, basically.
Definitely. And you actually touched upon a very good point, Holger, because some of the other challenges that we are seeing is that we are not often involving all these strategic stakeholders such as HR, department, compliance, and security. They should be there already from the beginning because the HR department or the HR manager is the one that got full visibility into identity or corporate identity data. And what does this mean? Well, this means basically that the HR support and control the life cycle of an identity from an start to an end date. They update all the data, they update all the identity attributes with new values, such as a first working day and a last working day. And basically there's a life cycle tied to that. And HR is probably the only department that knows about that, especially in the enterprise space. So that's why they should be considered as a strategic partner already in the beginning. Otherwise, that IGA project will definitely fail in the long run. And maybe not even in the long run, but actually in the short term as well. So that's why I have... That's why I always share this kind of phased approach to look at how can you start leveraging some of the capabilities that you have in Entra ID Governance. And not only in governance, but actually the whole suite, which is, of course, the topic of today. But as I mentioned in the beginning, the definition of IGA is that you have a mix between governance and compliance. Governance because you want to have some governance written rules that the identity should fully adapt to. Without any rules, your identities can get access to everything. And from a compliance perspective, we want to comply with different regulation and industry standard, so we don't get a bad thumb by the auditors or by the regulators. And in the middle of that circle you see on the screen is that we have 4 key pillars, and those are about policies and processes. Like I mentioned before, we have a business process around an onboarding, and onboarding can be many things. Onboarding can be about pre-joiner. So 14 days before Jack Smith joins the company, he needs to get access to certain SAP ABAP systems, and he needs to be assigned to all these respective business roles in SAP. And then the application and tool is, of course, the tool to manage that. And that tool is basically Entra ID Governance, which SAP have also pointed to being the new front runner for managing the lifecycle around those identities. And then we have the business roles and entitlements, which is all these metadata that we see not only in SAP, but also in Salesforce, cloud application, on-premise, and so on, right? And then the last part, which is quite underrated, and that's the change management and the adoption part of an IGA system. Not only from an administrator point of view, but also from an end user point of view. Because the end user, especially the employees that access these permissions, they need to consider a new way of actually getting access to these applications. They need to request. Some of these accesses are probably requestable. Some of them are actually maybe assigned as a birthright permission, meaning that they are auto-assigned based on some kind of an attribute that we get from the HR system, right? So that's how we can do it. So that's why I always mention the first part is to involve your HR system, establish the HR connectivity to Workday or SAP SuccessFactors or even SAP ACM. There was actually funny that we talking about SAP ACM. It's the legacy HR system, right, for managing identities in SAP and so on. But we have actually built a integration with SAP ACM. So for the listeners out, yes, we have done that. So it's not a direct connect integration, but we are actually leveraging our API-driven inbound provisioning so that we can have a logic app that actually calls an external API of the SAP ACM, and we have actually provided documentation. But I will share the links, and then we can share it to the audience later on. But yeah, as I mentioned, the first initiative is to define the scope for having HR on board, and then also maybe revisit the data quality. We don't want to import each and every attribute into the Entra directory. And the reason for saying that is we want to keep things confidential. We don't want to bring in personal sensitive information into the mapping between HR and Entra. So that could be, for an instance, like social security numbers. Those are things that we are not going to leverage in the Entra ID platform when we do provisioning, right? What we need from HR is the first day, the last working day. We need the given name. We need the job title. We need the department, because then we can leverage the RBAC concepts a bit more efficiently. And that's basically where we start. And then the next part is about role delegation. Who maintain and own all the system applications that we have in SAP? And I think I can't really stop emphasizing this enough, because this is very important. And this is also some of the challenges that I see out on the customer side, that a lot of these systems that are onboarded to Entra, such as your SAP B2P applications or SAP ECC, for instance, because that's a big one. There's a lot of the Danish customers that are using SAP ECC as a financial module as part of their businesses, right? And sometimes we forget that there should be an ownership, not just a technical owner, but also a business owner. There needs to be an owner of these applications, because in the IGA program, we have a component called certification campaigns, or in Entra ID Governance, it's called access review. Okay. And you don't want to send out access review to all the managers, because managers, they don't have any context. They don't have any information about the risks that these applications expose from a security point of view. The managers doesn't know, unless if it's a security manager. But maybe they even don't know, right? Yeah. So you need to have the application, the owner of that application in the access review as well, because they know the context. They can at least attestate and say, okay, well, this user from the, let's say, the marketing team, he have access to a financial module in the SAP ECC. He shouldn't actually have that. Well, then you reject that. But a manager wouldn't maybe necessarily be able to do that without any context. And talking about context, I will, of course, show a demo in a bit that actually go through this. And the next part will be about how would you group all these different permissions that we have. And I know, and you also know, Holger, that in the era of SAP IDM, especially in the on-prem SAP ECC, there's a lot of technical roles and different authorization objects that you need to manage. T codes, there are technical roles, single roles, composite roles, and so on. And how do you actually streamline these concepts into the Entra identity governance space? So that's another component to have in place as well. Maybe not all accesses should be requestable. Maybe some of these more, how do you say, these more less sensitive permissions, they can actually be auto-assigned without any approval, because we know that the identity that works for the SAP basis team, he needs a certain sense of permissions, and we want to assign that immediately without creating a service ticket in the ITSM system. And then correlation. This is how we ensure that once we have integrated the SAP applications to Entra ID, how do we make sure that existing or orphaned accounts in SAP are actually correlated to an active account? And if those accounts are not correlated to an active account through the provisioning service, we can actually get rid of them in the Entra ID governance as well. And then at the end, you would like to build out some report capabilities for your auditors so that you can actually prove that whatever you have written down in your corporate identity policies in a document is actually fulfilled and tested as well throughout the whole lifecycle journey of that user. And then, of course, have a training program, a continuous training program, so that you can educate your end users. And if they don't get an access, where do you raise a service ticket, and all these different things. It's small details, but it's actually pretty important in an IGA project that you have this. Otherwise, you will not be able to gain the trust and get the backup of the company and the different business departments. So that leads us to the next topic, which is around Entra ID governance and also Entra Suite. So for the listeners out there, Entra Suite is basically the umbrella that comprise both the Entra ID governance, which is our IGA solution. And then we have our security service edge, which is our private access, internet access. And then we have verified identity and identity protection. And all those components that I just mentioned is part of the Entra Suite. Now, what we have here on our slides is that we can actually use a lot of different components to actually support all these challenges that I just mentioned, which is essentially about identity and access lifecycle. So whenever a new joiner kicks in, let me see if I can find my laser pointer here. So we have a new joiner. And those joiners are probably created in an HR system, such as SAP SuccessFactors. And once they are created, they are provisioned through our connector. So that's the direct connector we have from SAP SuccessFactors to the Entra ID, or maybe in a hybrid scenario, it will be a local directory, Active Directory, right? And once those users are provisioned, we have maybe some additional tasks that we want to automate. So imagine if we had to do this manually. And some of the customers that I've been speaking with today are actually doing all these role delegations and role management manually. And they're actually assigning all these roles in the target system. And what I mean by target system is actually the outbound application that we integrate to the IDP, right? So instead of having a centralized IGA solution that can actually support and maintain the provisioning of these roles, we can actually use identity governance for that. And there's a specific module in identity governance we can leverage, which is called the lifecycle workflow. And the lifecycle workflow is basically an event-driven task where you mention some specific scope of tasks that it should execute. And then based on the input that you get from your HR system, you can actually leverage different attributes. You can even leverage custom security attributes to actually kick these different lifecycle events up. So we have the new joiner, we have the role changes. Man, that's the most challenging event of them all, because we all know when, let's say, Jack Smith, he had been hired, he had been working for a company for 15 years. He started out with some less sensitive permissions, and then doing his promotional changes or through job department changes, he started to get more permissions and more roles. And whenever someone moves into a new department, the likelihood of revisiting those old permissions are relatively low, right? And that's what we want to get rid of. We want to get rid of all these low-hanging and standing accesses by leveraging the mover event in lifecycle workflow, because then you can remove all the permissions, not only from an authorization point of view, but actually also from an access management point of view. We have actually introduced a new task as part of the lifecycle workflow, where you can revoke all existing sessions. And what I mean by sessions is that you can revoke the refresh tokens that keeps the session alive in the cloud app that you have just got access to. That could, for an instance, be SAP B2B application or a SAP Cloud Identity Service, where there is a token in exchange when you authenticate with your Entra ID user. So we can start revoking those tokens as well in case of a compromise or something that the vendor, for instance, have caught, right? And then when the worker leaves and he say goodbye to his manager and his team or her, then all these accesses that were provisioned need to be removed as well. All the rightful integrations that we have made to these different target systems that Jack has access to need to be cut off immediately. Otherwise, if we show an audit report of this, because all these things are locked down in an audit log table and a provisioning table in Log Analytics. It's 30 days per default, but you can always extend the retention on those log tables, which are quite crucial, especially if you are a regulated company. So if you are a GXP company, especially in the pharma or in the medicine industry, you probably have some rules where you need to lift up the retention, right? So it's important that you can prove that Jack Smith actually stopped that day, the first of first. And that's what lifecycle workflow are actually helping you to prove as an organization. What I'm trying to say here is that identity access governance as a domain, as a practice, is not just about automation. Automation is the small part of it. The key scenario here is that we can prove to the regulators and the auditors that we're actually compliant with our processes. So yeah. But enough talk. I think we have looking a lot into some slides, but I think it was good to kind of understand the influence of IGA in these days.
No,
the
absolutely.
That we see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually like this picture that outlines the life cycle of me as an employee, and then obviously HR here, the HR system is the and then via Entra ID being able to provision all the other systems to make sure that the roles are up to date, that the user is disabled, or that the user is enabled, and all these kind of things. So beautiful.
Exactly. And I know this one is pretty. This have been shown quite a lot before I jump into the demo. But just to augment and complement your point here is that SAP have also pointed, customers or advising the customers to use SAP Cloud Identity Services. And I even have some customers that are still leveraging SAP IDM, and they're also using, believe me or not, the SAP CUA, the Central User Administration, for some of the tasks that need to be delegated and all these things, right? So it's a lot of manual tasks. And they were not even aware that we actually had all these integrations in place, both from a federation point of view, but also from a provisioning. They said, well, Microsoft, you can't really integrate into the SAP ABAP environments. Then I told them, no, wait and see, my friend. I actually have a good friend of mine, Martin Refle. He have actually done a blog post with you as well and a podcast with you where he actually demonstrate this. So I think there's a lot of surprises from a customer point of view where they're like, okay, we didn't thought about this in the beginning. Because that's where the better together story fits into the picture as well. Because essentially, SAP Cloud Identity Service is an IDP in the SAP space, but we can actually forward all these authentication requests towards an Entra ID as a proxy IDP, so that we can use SAP Cloud Identity Service to also provision to the downstream SAP applications, like you see here with the SAP ABAP servers and so on. Yeah. And one thing is about showing this architecture. Another thing about doing it in the portal. So let's try to jump into the portal here. I'll just reshare my screen. I hope you can see it.
Yeah, I can see it, yeah.
So Entra ID Governance dashboard, which we are on, sorry, let me take that back again. So in the Entra ID Governance blade, we have a dashboard where we can see a current snapshot of our identity policies and about our current identity posture. So we can see how many members we have. And when we say members here, these are internal users that are synchronized and provisioned from our HR system. And not only member users, but we can actually see guest users. For those, I have 0. We can see our privileged roles. We can see all the applications that we have onboarded with the different app roles and so on. But what we want to talk about here in this or show in this demo is that in the entitlement management, we have the concept of catalogs and access packages. And an access package is the equivalent of a business role like you have in SAP ECC or different SAP systems. And it basically follows this 2-tier role model. So you have your access package. Let's choose a catalog first. You can actually build different catalogs based on the different applications that are onboarded. So you have one for on-prem. I have one for the SAP business department, which I will like to show today, right? And then under that catalog, we have an access package.
You have,
yeah.
Sorry, quick question. Is this something that you have configured, or is this something that we, as Microsoft, are shipping?
So this is something that I have configured.
This catalog here. Okay.
Exactly. This is something I have configured. So we can, all the admins, all the customers that are already having an P2 license can actually leverage Entra ID Governance today.
Okay.
There are some functionalities in the P2 that you can leverage, but I will of course demystify that part during the demonstration. But in this case, we have 5 different access packages. I have created one that are tied to different groups, and one of them actually followed some of the blog posts that were published by Martin Refle, so a big shout out to him as well. And because, as you know, we can tie role collections to a security group in Entra. And role collections is something that you can create or assign in SAP BTP platform. And then via the ID token that are exchanged to Entra, you can actually tie a group claim part of that. And that group claim part of the ID token can refer to a object ID from the security group. And that's why we can then leverage some of the role collections that are shown here. So we have one access package. And as I mentioned, an access package is a business role that contains multiple functional resources. And what I mean by functional resources is that it's not the access package itself that gives you the technical access to the downstream applications. It's these resources here that you see, that you can actually see here on the screen, that gives you the direct access to either SAP HANA Cloud or SAP BTP as well. And then we can configure, once we have added all the metadata, and what I mean by metadata is the entitlements, we can add a corporate access policy for your access packages. We can add multiple access policies. We can even add an auto-assignment policies, which have probably been demonstrated before. I don't know if you have seen it, but it's actually quite good, so that whenever you have someone that starts in a newer department, he's actually eligible to get this automatically without any approval. And as you can see here, one of the birthright roles that I have assigned has 325 active assignments. And the rest of them are actually requestable. And then you can start fine-graining all these policies and saying, you know what, I want to create one for internal users, so all of those that comes from the HR system, and then I want to create another policy that actually targets my external guest users that are invited from another business organization. Then I can start distinguishing between the different personas that I have in my company, which is quite cool. Then we can define SOD policies as well. So let's say if you have a reader role, well, you cannot certainly not get an admin role as well in the same application or in the same context. So that's why we can prevent this from happening by actually adding an SOD policy, so that whenever you log in to a portal to request further access, then you will get prevented from actually getting an admin or maybe a higher privilege role. So let's jump into the lifecycle workflow, because this is more about how you are designing your roles. Back to the entitlement management blade. This is more about how we can define and how we can design different access packages based on the needs and inputs that we gather from the businesses. Because again, as I mentioned in the beginning, the IGA is not a one-to-one project between IT and security. It's a more holistic project that needs to cover all these different edge cases that we get from HR, compliance, finance, security, and legal as well. So it's quite crucial. So once you have defined these access packages, we want to leverage the automation. And if you take a notice why I started out with speaking about data quality and about designing your RBAC concepts via entitlement management, is that we don't want to leverage lifecycle workflow on bad data quality. And the reason why I'm saying this is that in the lifecycle workflow, we can define a template that represents a certain onboarding or offboarding scenario. In this case, we have an onboarding scenario of a pre-hire employee where we can select this. We can define some of the small details about when it should be launched. And because it's a pre-hire, we can actually say, okay, you know what? Let's run this workflow 14 days
2 weeks before.
2 weeks before the employer hire date.
Okay.
And then and then we can configure a scope. Who should be targeted by this workflow? Should it be a specific department? Should it be a custom security attribute that we leverage? Or should it even be an on-premise extension attribute? Because remember, this is not only for cloud native scenarios, it's also for on-premise scenarios as well. So just to get back to this, Vade, I think this is important because when you do the mapping or the attribute mapping from your Active Directory to a SAP ABAP server, or from Entra to a SAP ABAP application, like let's say the NetWeaver application, right? You can leverage an attribute in SAP called company code. And a lot of customers are actually leveraging this attribute to build up their role hierarchy based on the company code attribute. So the reason why I'm mentioning this is that we can actually get that value into the lifecycle workflow as well because of the mapping. So we can use an on-premise extension attribute that are mapped to a company code attribute in SAP. And then we can start launching all these lifecycle workflow based on the input that we are getting from SAP as well. So it's quite cool that we can do that. But in the scope, we of course define the conditions. Let's say we want to run this for SAP business department, which I have defined in my directory. And then in the task, so this is where the magic happens. This is where we add all the tasks that an IAM admin will normally do manually, like assigning an E5 license. Assigning a manager, exactly, assigning roles, permissions, and maybe adding email or creating a service ticket in ServiceNow, for an instance. All those things that you will normally do as a support function or as an admin can be automated by this. And if you don't find anything that are maybe interesting to your use cases, you can even run a custom task extension. And what is a custom task extension? Well, that's basically a logic app that runs in the background that calls an external API to do something on behalf of the inputs that you add into your logic app. So if you want to have a fourth approval workflow, or if you want to call a ServiceNow instance to actually create a ticket once the SAP role have been assigned, you can actually use a logic app for that. So this can be anything that you have in mind or in your imagination.
I was just going to say, because logic apps, I mean, these are these process flows basically, and logic apps has thousands of connectors to basically almost any backend system. If that's not working, there are generic connectors like an HTTP connector where I could call any REST API or something like that. Yeah, that's really powerful.
That's very cool. And we even, I think, I mentioned about the SAP HCM integration with Logic App. Because there is a direct connector in the Logic App space, we can connect to the SAP NetWeaver portal and some of the legacy stuff and write specific queries to actually get that metadata from SAP and then run a provisioning job based on that. So that's quite cool. So that we can extend that capability. So if we just go back now, just to rewrap this, we can define up to a huge amount of tasks that we can add to a lifecycle workflow, and then we can run this on scheduled basis. We can run this on demand, meaning that if there's something urgent that, and sometimes it happens, right? Sometimes it happens that HR haven't informed IT about there's a new employee starting, and then all of a sudden IT and the support function have to,
Yes.
throw everything out of their hands and solve this. So they can basically do this by running it on demand for that specific user. Or in the best way, you want to do this automatically by running it. I think it can run from 1 hour to 24 hours.
Oh, really?
So
Okay.
that's quite cool. And I think if you keep consistency around your lifecycle events, you can actually start doing this in a more scheduled basis, so that it will refresh all these tasks and it will actually look for the scope as well, and it would evaluate all these inputs that we are getting. So if the department changes and we have another lifecycle workflow that takes care of the mover workflow, then the new workflow would actually take care of assigning new privileges and also removing all the old privileges, like I mentioned in the beginning, right? So if we go into the workflow section, I have created, prior to this demo, I have created a lifecycle workflow where I have defined certain tasks that need to be executed automatically. Now, for the sake of the demo, I will of course run this manually, but I will just summarize what we are going to achieve here, step by step. So we have an account that I created in a Workday instance, and just to show you that, we have a Workday connector to Microsoft Entra. Now, this is a cloud native scenario. We also have this supported for on-premise systems or on-premise Active Directory. But for the sake of the demo, I have just done a direct mapping to Entra ID. And then we can define our mapping in the provisioning blade and so on. So just to get back again. So we have a task of, we have 7 tasks where we want to provision the E5 license. We want to add employee to the SAP Business Team channel. We want to create a SAP user account in Cloud Identity Service. So this will be handled by the provisioning, or the IPS, which is the Identity Provisioning module in the SAP Cloud Identity Service. And then we will also assign a SAP BTP developer role collection. And in the end, we will grant a zero trust network access to the SAP NetWeaver ABAP portal via private access. So through the global secure access client that will facilitate the connectivity, but also establish dedicated tunnels towards the ABAP server. And then in the end, we will generate a temporary access pass and send email for MFA registrations to the IAM team. So the IAM team will get the temporary access pass. And once that is done, then the IAM team will then hand over the temporary access pass once the first working day have passed. So we can actually do that. And as you can see, we can define the settings for the temporary access pass. It will last for 8 hours. So this will be utilized on his first working day.
Yeah.
So just for the sake of the demo, I will run this. So this will run on the first working day. So that's why you can really specify specific days from the event. Exactly. So what we will do now is that let's go under the overview and let's run this on demand. And our victim in this case is actually Jack Smith. And because I've already mentioned Jack Smith a couple of times during my presentation in the beginning, we will just go forward. We will just go ahead with this user here. So as you see, he's part of my tenant, Cloud Scraper. He's part of the Entra ID. He's an internal member. And what will happen in the background is that a new task will be executed. If we just refresh it a couple of times. Yeah, so as you can see, this new workflow have been triggered, and we can see that it's in progress. So it will expedite all the 7 tasks that we have defined as part of the event trigger in the lifecycle workflow. And we can see that some of it are completed and some of it are queued. So let's refresh this again and see if it has failed. It has not failed. So the demo gods are with me today. That's good. Or it's not.
Oh, one failed. Yeah.
Oh, one failed. But hey, man, that's part of the live demo, right? So the access package was not found. And that's probably because that access package was misconfigured. So I probably deleted one of the access packages that's probably why. So
Okay.
if we just go back again, and you know what we can do? We can do something. We can fix this while we are live, right? Just quickly, and ask any questions if there is while I do this.
So we could actually see that most of the tasks actually completed, right?
Yes.
So it was just this one thing. And if you're saying, yeah, the access package, there was an issue with the access package.
Exactly. Yes. So the access package was misconfigured. I have normally when you assign an access package to a lifecycle workflow, you can define or you can actually pick up the access package that you want to include as part of the workflow. But since I have deleted it from a previous state, then it failed. So that's the reason why it actually failed. But we can start to look at the let's go in the workflow history. And if we click on Jack Smith again, we can see of course, all the tasks have been completed, but the last task have been cancelled. And that's because one of the tasks have been have actually failed. Hence, we are getting this error messages here.
Yeah.
But essentially what will happen, but since I've already provisioned this user to Cloud Identity Service, we can actually log in to the Cloud Identity Service. We can see that we have an user account created, which is Jack Smith. So you can see the user service principal name is coming from our Entra ID tenant. So we already have a user here that are created in the provisioning, in the directory space of Cloud Identity Service. And so if we go into the SAP BTP application, that's also where we establish the trust between identity authentication service and SAP BTP. Then we can actually log into an instance with with Jack Smith to actually look if his SSO access actually works. Let's do that. Now let's try to log in again. Okay, so if we click on SAP HANA Cloud, it's actually a bundle of applications that I've created from SAP BTP. So I should be able to actually log in with my SSO credentials with Jack Smith. And yeah, since it's loading, let's see. And remember that I told you that we actually pass the information, the group claim information as part of the ID token. We have actually added those two groups into Jack Smith's access package. So when Jack Smith logs in to SAP HANA Cloud, he will actually be able to log in with a SAP HANA viewer permission, which is tied to the role collection in the group. And then he also has a SAP BTP developer permission that he can use as well. So we will be able to see that. But I don't know why it's kind of slow, but yeah, anyhow.
I believe you.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So yeah, what we can also do, we can also run into or go into the email of that. So if we just, before going into the email, we can jump into the user. And then let's search on Jack Smith. So you can see that all the groups were assigned. The BTP developer SSO was assigned, which essentially gives access to the BTP application through the OpenID Connect that are integrated between Entra and SAP BTP. And then we also, provision the SAP HANA Cloud Viewer permission as well.
Yes.
So once he logs into the SAP HANA, he will successfully authenticate without any problems with the help of conditional access, of course.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was pretty much on the demo. And maybe just to finish up, I will just show them a bit about the blog post, which is essentially why you also contacted me for a while ago about how the Entra ID governance, together with of course, with the Entra suite, fits into the SAP environment, right? Because we have all these different components that we can leverage in terms of provisioning, skim provisioning, which we are using to provision users from an HR system down to Active Directory, which is number one here. If I just show my laser pen
Mm-hmm.
pointer. So we have number one, which is streamlining the identities from the HR system to Active Directory. And then via the Cloud Sync or the AD Connect Sync, we synchronize the user to the Entra ID.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the Entra ID, we are able to actually both authenticate the user to the downstream applications that we have, but we're actually able to also take advantage of the trust relations that are built between the SAP Cloud Identity Service, exactly, the single sign-on, the Open ID Connect, but also in the future, we will be able to aggregate SAP business roles from SAP IAG to Entra ID Governance.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that we are looking really for, and that's something a lot of our clients and customers, especially partners, have requested for a while, that we need to get that metadata in. Now, there is a possibility to actually leverage some of the group profiles that you can aggregate as part of the provisioning flow. So you're actually able to use the app roles that you have in an Entra ID applications, but there's a limitations on that. I will believe it's around 1,500 app roles that you can leverage today in an enterprise app. And in a SAP environment, you have more than 2,000 roles. You have many authorizations.
Very complex.
That's a no-go on an enterprise level. But I think in the future we will be able to cover that in a more efficient way. That's for sure. So the integration topology speaks not only into the Entra ID governance, and that's what we have covered in the demo when I went into the Entra ID governance portal. But what is also kind of underrated and some customers are started to look into is to how we can leverage private access, which is essentially our zero trust network access component that can facilitate dedicated secure tunnels, which runs through a gRPC tunnel to any given endpoint. And an endpoint in this case could be a SAP GUI client, or it could be a SAP ABAP server that are accessed through SAP GUI client. So you can actually publish these endpoints in an app segmentation in private access so that you can validate each and every unique network flow. And these network flows are intercepted by the global secure access client, which sits on the local machine itself. So it could be a hybrid joint device, or it could be an intra-joint device, which is the prerequisites to run the global secure access client.
Yeah.
And then in the network, you can also see that there's a network connector that sits on in the internal network that facilitate all the outbound connectivity to the target system that you want to tunnel through private access. And today you can use actually CARBOS, you can use Windows Hello for Business to actually access passwordless directly to a SAP GUI client or a SAP ABAP server. So it's actually quite cool that we can extend modern IAM capability not only to the IGA but also to the network security part in the era of zero trust network access. Yeah.
So that's really what I like, that this holistic view that we are providing here to customers. That on the one hand, you can manage the identity, you can work with single sign-on, but you can also then make sure that you have a secure access.
Definitely. Really nice. And the nice part about this, especially on the private access, is that we are actually evaluating the tokens as well as part of not only identity protection, but also as part of the continuous access evaluation. So when someone logged in to an application that support OAuth 2.0, which is the modern authorization protocol, then we are able to evaluate any, let's say, changes that are happening to the identity. So we are way more identity context aware when we are leveraging intra-private access. Because in the past, you had to integrate continuous access evaluation with the applications that could actually support it. But with private access, we actually have a new functionality. Don't get me wrong, I think we are still in public preview with it, but the universal continuous access evaluation can actually support you on that. So it can integrate with any types of TCP, UDP applications or any types of applications, and then bring in the continuous access evaluation for your SAP application as well. Because remember, when you authenticate to an SAP ABAP server, you authenticate with a X509 certificate or through CARBOS essentially. And that token will still live there somewhere once you have actually blocked the user in Entra. So the token will still be alive in the SAP ABAP server. But now with the universal continuous access evaluation, we can then actually revoke that near real time, which is quite cool from a SOC perspective.
Cool. Lots of interesting details.
Definitely.
Fantastic.
Yeah, but that's what I had for now.
No, fantastic. I think it was great to see Entra ID Governance, to see the details, to see the holistic picture here, really potentially a customer representation. I mean, here we see SAP, but we also see Workday, which we see obviously that customers not only have Microsoft, or they not only have SAP and Microsoft, but it's a grown environment there. We see more and more components. So Raj, it was great to get these insights from you. Thank you very much for walking us through the different steps. I'm sure we'll meet again on the podcast. So
definitely.
For now, yeah, perfect. So for now, thank you so much. It was a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.